There was a recent news case. You may have followed these supposed Russian spies, these American citizens. Did you follow this at all? Okay,
No,
these American citizens, they're just regular people, and they were on the employ of the Russian government. This is just a few weeks ago, and they were caught. But they were being paid by the Russians to meet and talk to influential people in New York and Washington, and then just sort of report back to the Russian government. And I thought of you. I said, you know, what have these people done wrong? Now, there was no extortion. They didn't break into anyone's house and secretly copy documents or anything like that. But they were labeled spies. In fact, the government, I think, is prosecuting them for treason. So I was wondering, I wonder if Walter Block would defend treason.
Well, you know, in the Constitution it says that when governments become abusive of these ends, it is our obligation to alter and abolish them. Well, altering and abolishing government is treason. Hey, you know, I am coming out with a sequel to this book, and I'm going to...
I think you ought to defend treason.
Yes, I'm going to...
Again, a certain type of treason where you're not violating anyone's rights.
Right.
You know.
And this whole thing with Russia, Murray Rothbard had a very interesting thing. He said, yes, Russia internally was horrible. I mean, communism, millions of people died. But externally, what did they do wrong compared to the U.S.? And he said, well, yes, they took over Eastern Europe, but the reason for that is that Germany had invaded them 3 times in the last 100 years, and they wanted to have a cordon sanitaire around them. But they didn't, except for Cuba, do much of imperialist stuff. Whereas the U.S. has got military bases everywhere. I think we've got some on Mars and Venus, too, but I'm not sure about that, in case the Venusians or the Martians get uppity and attack us. So what Murray says is you cannot infer foreign policy from domestic policy. It's possible to have a horrible domestic policy and not a very bad foreign policy, whereas the U.S. has a much better domestic policy, more free in the U.S. than in Russia. But our foreign policy has been one of aggrandizement and imperialism. So it might be justified to spy for them. I'm not sure. I'll have to think about this. But the point is that if in the Constitution, what's his name? Tom Woods has this new book out, Nullification, where he's saying states have a right to nullify federal law if the federal law is unconstitutional. Well, there's a lot of unconstitutional stuff going on. The Commerce Clause, you know, where you grow some corn in your house and you feed your chickens and you eat the chickens, and that's interstate commerce, and therefore the government can control. The Interstate Commerce Clause was to make sure that the states didn't have tariffs against each other, and that was it. And they use it as a way of just controlling everything. So to alter or abolish that would be treason. So yeah, treason is a good one. Thanks. I owe you one.
Well, here's a question. We've I think disagreed a little bit, although I may be coming around. You'd be happy to know.
Oh, okay.
One of the kinds of property rights that we have disagreements amongst ourselves about is intellectual property. Now, when it comes to real property, I think whether you're a Chicago economist or an Austrian economist, for the most part, we say, okay, if I've got a piece of real estate and it's mine, you can't trespass it. That'd be a violation of my rights. But intellectual property, music, books, software, and so forth, is a little bit more of a challenge. And could you talk about that for us?
Before I talk about it, I just wanted to mention it. I should have mentioned when you're talking about people who are supposedly our friends who you cringe at. Another one is Coase. I must have 15 articles attacking Ronald Coase and Milton Friedman and those guys. But now I'll answer your question. I mean, I'm a professor. I'm not supposed to answer questions directly. You always have to go circuitously. On intellectual property, my guru on that is a guy named Stephan Kinsella, who wrote this magnificent article in the Journal of Libertarian Studies. And what he says is that only one person can wear your pair of shoes right now. But an idea is, by its very nature, something that is limitless. 2 plus 2 is 4, or E equals mc squared. If I learn it from you and I use it, I haven't taken it away from you, you still have it. Or take another case. Girl A puts her hair up in a ponytail. And girl B says, whoa, that's a great idea. I'll put my hair up in a ponytail. Did girl B go over to girl A and discombobulate her ponytail? No, she left her alone. She just copied her idea. But ideas are things that are not scarce. And it makes sense to have property rights only for chairs and tables and shoes and wristwatches and eyeglasses and ties and whatever. That if I have it, you can't have it, and if you have it, I can't have it. But if we can both have it, where is the rights violation? Let me give you another example. A log cabin. There are two ways to make a log cabin. One, you just put logs on and you put mud in there, and it's very unstable because the logs roll off each other. The other is you put little cuts in the logs, and then you stack them up, and they're very firm. Okay, so you're building your log cabin that way, and I said, whoa, that's magnificent. I'll go do it. What did I steal of yours? Now, Hans Hoppe has this idea of contradiction, that if you say something that is an internal contradiction, you really shouldn't be speaking. Now, if I really have the view, first of all, let's get back to this thing about the patents and copyrights that have a certain number of years. I forget what the years are, and it keeps changing. But the point is, those shoes that you own forever. You can give them to your kids. They can give it to their kids. There's none of this, well, in 75 years or in 32 years or whatever, it reverts to something else. So if these people were serious, they would say, well, property rights in ideas are permanent. You can buy them and sell them and give them to your kids and have them until the end of time. Well, if that's true, I can't even speak, because I just used the word speak. Well, Mr. Speak first came up with the word speak. Well, who am I daring to use the word speak without giving his heirs money? Now, it's true these people don't hold that view, but if they were logically consistent, they wouldn't have this timelessness thing or time-denominated thing. They would have it timeless. I couldn't speak because every word that I use in the English language or in any language, French, Italian, whatever, somebody invented. I can't. So if I really believe in this, I have to shut up, which is a problem with a philosophy that you can't even articulate it and be consistent with the philosophy. So, I once had that view that property rights, and Ayn Rand has this view that property rights are very important in ideas, and I think that you can't have that. Okay, so that's the deontology. Now you get into the practical thing. Well, would we have any music? Would we have any new pharmaceuticals? Would we have any new computers or whatever, or any new books? And the argument Stephan Kinsella makes is that even on a practical level, you would, and it would even be more powerful. For example, suppose you put your name on my book, Defending the Undefendable. Now, you can't say you wrote it because that would be fraud, but you could say, as brought to you.
So I sit down and I retype your book.
Well, you can Xerox it. You don't have to retype it. You can scan it in. Retyping might be too rough. And now you start selling it, and you keep all the whatevers, the royalties. Are you harming me economically speaking? Well, in a sense, yes. I could have had those royalties, but in another sense, my speaking value, I do public speaking, and I get paid for it, and now more people are going to want to hear me speak because you're helping me out. It's the same thing with pirating Elvis Presley. More people are going to want to hear Elvis because you're being like his agent. So it's very unclear. And there are whole bunches of examples of this, like when paperback books first came out. People said, well, that'll be the end of hardbacks. But people wanted to get the hardbacks first. Paris dresses, they pay tens of thousands of dollars for a Paris dress, and 6 months later it's available in Macy's. So people are willing to pay for earlier stuff. Okay, so I now invent the cure for cancer. And I'm making out like a bandit. I mean, cancer is a bad thing, and I'm charging $10,000 a pill, and it costs me 3 cents. And in 6 months, you're going to have it too, and I don't have a patent on it. well, I'm going to make a killing right off the bat. Just time is very important, like in the paperback versus the hardcover books. Or people said when DVDs came out, nobody would go to the movie theaters anymore. But people do go to the movie theaters because time is very important. So on a practical level, it wouldn't mean that there'd be an end to innovation, whether music or computers or books or whatever. What Stephan Kinsella says, we'd have the optimal amount. Look, the optimal amount of innovation isn't 100%, because if we had 100% of our GDP devoted to that, we'd all die. We'd have no food. So we have to have the right amount. And he says the right amount is the amount that would ensue when the law was just. And the law is just when it says you can't own property in ideas.
I've always wondered why we can't use contract law more effectively rather than property law. I mean, for example, I invent the magic pill that cures cancer. And I say, here's the magic pill. You have cancer. Walter, here's the magic pill. I want $10,000 for you for this pill. I'm going to give you the pill. But you are not allowed to give it to someone else.
Right. No.
You're not allowed to examine the chemical components, put it in an spectrometer or however they do these things in science. And here's the pill. And now if you buy the pill under those terms, this is contract law. We're not actually, it's a different area of law than property law.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
And you agree. And suppose you take the pill and say, well, I'm going to copy this pill first. Then I should have you for a contract violation.
Absolutely.
Right? So this is, I think, I don't want to say it's a middle ground, but this is one of my replies to people who are strong advocates of intellectual property is that, look, you want to provide incentives for people. Well, we can do that through contract. And then, of course, it becomes a question of, well, do I always enforce my contract? Sometimes no, sometimes yes. And it gets to be more of a marginal benefit, marginal cost kind of optimum calculation that we all do in everyday life. What do you think about the contract law?
I agree. Contract, and Kinsella has that in his article, that it would be a contract violation if you make the contract. The problem is, suppose I sell you this book and you leave it on the park bench. You didn't purposely violate the contract, but very few people would sign a contract which said, well, if I accidentally leave the book, you can sue my rear end off. I mean, so it only goes so far.
Well, in contract law, there are defenses for your tort and so forth, and perfectly reasonable ways of dealing with those things in real life. I mean, we actually have contracts, and those contracts are never complete. Sometimes people end up in court, and very often there's a defense that says, well, yeah, I know I violated it, but here's the reason I violated it, and there seems to be a way around.
But you're not really defending intellectual property.
That's right.
What you're defending is contracts.
Contracts. That's my point.
I'm in favor of contracts. I mean, I'm a free enterpriser.
But it would seem to be a more efficient way of getting at, again, the end result that many people want with IP is some preservation of the incentive to create these things. It seems to me we have that at our disposal through contract law.
But we also have it. We also have the incentive through time.
Yes, of course.
If you're the first one and you get this thing out, and these examples of the dresses from Paris and the movie theater, you want to see the movie now. You want to get the hard copy now, even though the hard copy costs $30, and you know that it'll be available in 6 months for $7 for a softcover book. You want to get it now, so there still is an incentive. And contract law would be another way of having an incentive, but the problem is, it's sort of hard to sue if you sell 10,000 people the cure for cancer, and now it gets out. It's really hard to monitor that.
Well, that's true.
So on a pragmatic level, it might not take you as far as you want to go.
I'm not so sure.
Well,
because in copyright law we currently have, most of the onus is on the holder, the rights holder, to sue individual rights violators. Now, you wouldn't consider them rights violators, but that's actually how it works now. And so you could say the same thing about copyright law. Copyright law is really hard to enforce because you have to enforce it against all of those violators. And in many cases, in real life and practice, people just give up. They say, well, my patent, I know I have a patent, but everybody's copied it. It's too expensive for me to enforce. So I think that, again, I'd like to, people forget that contracts are a very effective way to deal with many problems. We don't need meta rule, like some property rule, which is, like you say, property rules are now and forever. I own that land forever. My heirs will own it, and their heirs will own it, and so forth. We don't need permanent property rights for a lot of economic issues. We just need, here, we're going to have you and I are going to deal, and we're going to have some terms on that deal. The terms are not infinitely long. If I stop enforcing those terms, then it just goes away into the ether. Seems like a very reasonable approach.
I predict that in the truly free society, you wouldn't have much of this. It's because one reason it's very inefficient. You see, right now, if I want to invent something, I've got to go around all sorts of patents. I just can't go straight ahead and invent it. And there are people that create patents for the sole purpose not of creating anything, but of keeping other people from inventing stuff. And you've got a lot of very talented, very bright lawyers and chemists and engineers who are, instead of inventing stuff, they're fighting in court over this stuff, whether it's intellectual property or contract. So my prediction, which might differ from yours, is that in a truly free society where you had no intellectual property and you had only contract, this would sort of disappear, and there'd be a lot of people who would now, instead of fighting out in court, would fight it out in a laboratory against the disease instead of fighting it against other people who are trying to invent stuff. I mean, it's really horrible what you have to do to invent stuff. You have to go around all sorts of other patents, which are purposely set up there, as I say, not to create anything, but to stop you from creating something. So the system is a little bonkers.
How about one last question?
Sure.
What are you working on right now? Can you give us a...
God, that's a vicious question. I refuse to answer without my
must
lawyer.
Be working on something now.
Well, I am doing a sequel to Defending the Undefendable, and I'm writing another article on blackmail about how great that is. And I am the world's leading publisher of blackmail, at least in terms of number of words printed on that. I must have 30 refereed journal articles in law reviews on blackmail. I don't know why I got into it, but I just got into it.
Can you give us the 30-second Walter Block's view on blackmail?
Well, you have to distinguish between blackmail and extortion. In extortion and blackmail, there's a threat and a demand for money. But in extortion, the threat is, I'll punch you in the nose unless you give me money. In blackmail, it's, unless you give me money, I'm going to tell the truth about you. I saw you with this other woman, I'm going to tell your wife, or I saw you cheating, or you plagiarized, or whatever it was. Well, namely gossiping about you, but I have every right to gossip. We have no laws against gossip. It's only if you see, I have a right to gossip, but I don't have a right to say, hey, I won't gossip about you if you give me money. Well, that's crazy. I mean, if I have a right to do it, I have a right and to threaten to do it. And yet the blackmail law says, no, I can only do it, I can't threaten to do it.
Yeah, we do have a lot of laws where you're allowed to do it as long as money doesn't change hands.
Right.
I'm allowed to donate a kidney to you, but I can't charge you 4 cents for it.
Well, it's greed. Capitalism, we can't have that because it's selfishness and it'll pervert everything. No, but you're quite right. I was just kidding about that. I mean, if a thing is just, it's just if you pay money for it. And if it's unjust whether you pay or not.
That's a great ending. Thank you, Walter. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on your show here.
Deal.
My pleasure.